In recent days, a series of dramatic developments across the Middle East and beyond have once again reminded us how fragile the global balance really is. From Afghanistan to Iran, from Iraq to Syria, the region is moving through one of the most dangerous and uncertain periods of the last decade. Let's take these headlines one by one and try to understand what is actually happening and what it might mean for the world. Let's start with Afghanistan. The Taliban returned to power in the summer of 2021, taking control of the country with almost no resistance. On the day Kabul fell, hardly a single shot was fired. The Afghan army collapsed, the state apparatus dissolved, and the previous government fled the country. The Taliban described this moment as the end of the occupation. What followed, however, was not a transition toward normalcy, but rather a systematic process of isolation and repression. At first, the Taliban tried to send moderate messages to the world. They spoke about respecting women's rights within their own interpretation of Islam, about granting general amnesty, and about maintaining public order. But it quickly became clear that this was only a tactical move. Step by step, restrictions returned and even intensified. First, girls were banned from secondary education. Then universities were either closed or strictly segregated by gender. Women were pushed out of public life. Female government workers were dismissed. Women were forbidden to travel long distances without a male guardian. Rules were introduced that effectively forced women to cover their faces completely in public. And it didn't stop there. Music was banned, instruments were destroyed, weddings became silent events. Dancing, or even watching people dance, was criminalized. Gyms were closed, men were ordered to grow beards. Western clothing was forbidden. Television and radio were placed under heavy censorship. At times, even images containing human figures were removed. The internet was not completely shut down, but it was placed under strict control. Any content that crossed the Taliban's ideological red lines was blocked for being un-Islamic. The result? A society cut off from the world, pushed back into isolation, fear, and silence. Now, on top of all this, a new penal system has been introduced. According to this new order, slavery has been given a legal framework. The definition of sinful behavior has been expanded, and what's even more disturbing is this: punishment is no longer only the responsibility of the courts or the state. Ordinary citizens are now encouraged, even legitimized, to intervene directly. In other words, the right to punish has been moved from institutions to the streets. Violence has been redefined. If there is no broken bone or open wound, some forms of physical assault may no longer even count as a crime. Political opposition has been practically erased. Harsh punishments are imposed on dissidents. An extensive informant system has become a central mechanism of control. Think about this scenario. You are an opposition journalist in Afghanistan. You don't even need to be caught yourself. If someone knows you are critical of the regime and does not report you, that person is now also guilty. This creates a society where everyone is forced to spy on everyone else. No matter how you look at it, this is a horrifying system. We are living in a world where, in 2026, scientists are talking about cloning DNA and even reviving extinct species. People seriously discuss missions to Mars. And yet, on the very same planet, slavery is becoming legal again, and girls are not even allowed to go to school. This is not something that can be brushed off as just a different culture. Anything that violates basic human rights cannot be justified or normalized by cultural arguments. That is the reality of Afghanistan today. Now, let's move on to Iran. The United States, under Donald Trump, is once again seriously considering a major military strike against Iran. Among the options reportedly on the table are airstrikes against Iranian leadership targets, nuclear facilities, and key state institutions. At the same time, Iran's Navy has issued a new NAVTEX warning, stating clearly that any ship crossing Iran's declared red lines would be considered a legitimate target. Almost simultaneously, the United States moved a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier strike group into the region and placed it on high alert. Trump personally announced this military buildup, saying, "A massive fleet is moving toward Iran, a great power moving fast with strength and determination. I hope Iran comes to the table quickly to negotiate a fair and just deal. Time is running out for them." The response from Tehran was anything but soft. Iranian officials declared, "We are not afraid of any conflict. If the flames rise, They will burn the region and the whole world. In other words, if you attack us, this will not stay limited. It will become a regional war. Iran's past behavior gives us some important context. After the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, Iran did strike US bases, but it also sent indirect warnings beforehand. Even in the limited clashes of 2025, Tehran followed a relatively controlled retaliation strategy. But today, the situation is different. This time, Iran is not only under external pressure, it is also facing a deep internal crisis of legitimacy and control. More than 6,000 people have reportedly been killed in protests. That is an enormous number. To put it in perspective, it's like losing 15 to 20 people every single day for a year. This is not far from a low-intensity civil war. The protests have not truly ended. The state is using extreme force. The cycle of violence is deepening. And now, Europe is also stepping in. The European Union is preparing to designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. For a long time, countries like France and Spain resisted this step, but now their position has changed. If this decision passes, it won't just be symbolic. It will trigger travel bans, asset freezes, financial restrictions, and severe sanctions against individuals and networks linked to the Revolutionary Guard. This means the pressure on Iran will no longer come only from the United States. Europe will also be firmly in this file. Iran's room for maneuver is shrinking fast. Many analysts believe that this level of tension cannot be sustained for long. In the coming weeks, it is increasingly likely that the US could launch a direct military operation against Iran. Now, let's turn to Iraq and Syria. In Iraq, there is a deep political crisis over the prime ministership. Around 90% of Iraq's budget depends on oil revenues, and a large portion of this money is still held under US oversight. Trump has openly stated that if Nouri al-Maliki returns as prime minister, the United States may cut its support to Iraq. Why Maliki? Because Washington sees him as a figure close to Iran. During his previous term, between 2006 and 2014, Iraq was pushed into sectarian conflict, state authority weakened, and the conditions that allowed ISIS to rise were created. For the US, Maliki's return would mean Iran's influence in Iraq becoming even more institutionalized. That's why Washington has drawn a very clear red line here. Iraq, in this sense, is a country that can hardly even make its own internal political choices without pressure from major powers. And finally, Syria. Putin has announced that Russia supports the Syrian government's efforts to restore the country's territorial integrity. This is a clear political green light for Damascus, especially regarding gains against the SDF in the north. At the same time, reports say that Russian troops are withdrawing from some areas. This leaves the SDF increasingly isolated. Neither Russia nor the US seems fully committed anymore. That gives the Syrian government more leverage, more legitimacy, and more space to act. And as we always say, the stability of Syria matters to all of us. What happens in the Middle East never stays only in the Middle East. These developments affect the entire region and beyond. So, from Afghanistan to Iran, from Iraq to Syria, this is the picture of the world we are looking at today. Rising tensions, shrinking diplomacy, and a growing risk of regional, even global, escalation. Thanks for listening, my friends. Don't forget to like the video and stay tuned for more updates. See you next time.